Today I'm going to be sharing two horrifying encounters with the legendary Dogman. But before we get into those encounters, welcome back to Dark Wilderness, where I share encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter that you would like to share, please email me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, as I'll be uploading multiple times every week. So if you're out of the woods and you see Dogman, quietly reach into your pocket and pull out that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounters. This first encounter comes from Chad, and it happened in 2013 while he was hiking down the Emerald Triangle Trail in Yoho National Park in British Colombia. The Emerald Triangle Trail is a fairly difficult day hike. It runs in a loop around Emerald Lake, up through some mountain ridges, and then back down again, and it runs for a span of about 18.2 kilometers. It's considered fairly difficult because of the elevation change on this hike. It goes for an elevation of about 1,096 meters, which is roughly 3,600 feet. Chad was a very avid hiker, and he had actually hiked the Emerald Triangle Trail quite a few times in the past. However, this time it was going to be a lot different for him because he was bringing along his new hiking partner, and his new hiking partner was his 7-month-old purebred German Shepherd named Stone. He had gotten Stone about 4 months prior to this hike, and since he was already camping in Yoho, he figured this would be the perfect opportunity to take his dog on this trail and just kind of see how his dog handled a longer hike like this. He had taken the dog out for shorter hikes before, but never nothing of this magnitude. So he figured this was a perfect opportunity to see how his dog handled that type of environment. So on the Wednesday morning, he woke up, gathered up all of his gear, made sure that he had plenty of water for himself and for Stone. Then they hopped into the car and they made the drive to Emerald Lake, where the trailhead was. They got there at about 10 o'clock in the morning, got out, and they started making their way down that trail. For the first while, Chad kept Stone nice and close beside him on his lead, but after a while, they were coming across quite a few fallen trees down across this trail, and Chad was having a bit of a hard time managing climbing over these trees with his pack on and managing Stone's lead. So he thought Stone responded very well on shorter hikes and very well at home, so he figured he would just take Stone off the lead for a while and just let him run free. Even though he knew that was against national park rules, because in the national parks, dogs have to be on a leash at all times. But he had not seen anybody yet on the trail. He didn't see any cars at the trailhead. So he figured it wouldn't hurt anybody to have him run free. So he unlatched Stone's leash, and Stone took off running down the trail in front of him. Chad was worried that Stone would get too far up ahead, or he would see an animal and run off the trail and get lost, get hurt, or get attacked by a bear or a wolf or a cougar or something. But it seemed like every time Stone would get a little bit too far up ahead, Stone would just stop and wait for Chad to catch up. At one point they came to this part of the trail where it kind of comes up out of the bush line onto this rocky ridge. And as soon as they got onto that ridge, Chad noticed off to the side of the trail, there was a group of bighorn sheep grazing not too far from the trail. He was worried that Stone was going to see those sheep and take off after them, but Stone didn't bother with them at all. He just kept walking down the trail, periodically turning around, looking back at Chad. So Chad was really impressed with this, and he figured, you know what, I'm not even going to bother hooking him back up to his leash until we get back to the trailhead. He's doing a really good job. So the two of them, they just kind of kept going along that rocky ridge till they got to a part of the trail where it kind of turns and goes back downhill towards Emerald Lake. Shortly after getting back into the bush line on that downslope back towards Emerald Lake, Chad noticed that the area went completely quiet. He could no longer hear birds close by. He could only hear them off in the distance. And even Stone was acting weird. He was basically staying right at Chad's side, and he was no longer running up ahead. That made Chad feel pretty nervous, so he decided he was just going to reconnect the lead to Stone. So he had to stop, take off his backpack in order to get the lead back out. And as soon as he put his pack down and knelt down beside it, Stone took off in a full run down the trail, barking and growling with his hackle standing up. Chad abandoned his backpack and took off in a full sprint after Stone, but Stone was just way too fast and Chad could not keep up. And shortly after, he could no longer see Stone up ahead of him anymore, but he could still hear him barking off in the distance. Chad just kept running down the trail after Stone, and after a couple of minutes, it actually sounded like Stone had stopped running. His barking started to sound a lot closer rather than getting further away. And as Chad made his way around this turn in the trail, he spotted Stone about 20 yards off the trail, barking and growling up into a tree. So Chad ran towards Stone, grabbed him by the collar. The whole time Stone was just kept barking and growling up into this tree. So with his hand on Stone's collar, Chad looked up into the tree, and looking down at him about 15 feet above his head was what he described as looking like a real-life werewolf. He described this dogman as being very large, very muscular. He describes its back legs as being bent backwards like a dog, and it was actually standing on a limb of a tree with one arm around the tree and its other arm kind of hanging down to its side. And it was just staring right down at him as he was staring up at it. He said it had yellow eyes. He said on the ends of its fingers were really sharp looking claws. And he describes the teeth as looking like they're just razor sharp. He said he got this absolute feeling of dread from this thing looking down at him. And he froze in fear for a minute, just staring back up at this thing. He said he could see the saliva dripping from its mouth and falling down to the ground. After a couple of seconds of basically being in a trance, staring up at this dogman, he pulled on Stone's collar and they just started running back towards the trail. When they hit the trail, they turned and they just headed downhill back towards the trailhead. For about the first mile, Chad said that feeling of dread that he had when he was looking up at that dogman did not go away, and he felt like at any time this thing was going to come running up behind him or it was going to come out of the bushes. But after about a mile, he noticed that he could start to hear the birds again, and that feeling of dread, he said, slowly went away. They just kept running though all the way until they got back to the truck. And he said that entire time that they were running, from the time that they hit the trail till the time they got back to the vehicle, he said that Stone did not leave his side. He would not run up ahead. He did not turn around and run back. He just stayed right beside him that entire time. When they got to the vehicle, Chad was really happy that he does not put his keys or his wallet or anything like that inside of his pack while he's hiking. He always carries one of those fanny packs with him that carries his wallet, a small first aid kit, as well as his keys and an extra bottle of water. So at that point, he was really happy he was wearing that and had his keys, because had he not had his keys, he would have either had to keep running down this road, wait for somebody to come to this trailhead, or he would have had to go back up the trail to go get his pack that he left on the trail. But luckily he had that, so he was able to get into the vehicle, and they managed to make it back to their campsite. Chad doesn't know if Stone came upon this dogman while it was already up in the tree, or if Stone actually made this dogman go up into the tree. But his advice is, if you're going on a long hike, especially if you're going in the mountains, he said just leave your pets on a lead. He said it's just a lot safer for them. He said this situation could have ended badly for either of them. And he said just always make sure you keep your pets on a lead and just always be aware of your surroundings. This encounter comes from Ben, and it happened this past fall while he was out archery whitetail hunting up by Lilly, Wisconsin. Ben's a very avid deer hunter, and he has been all of his life, and this particular area is the area that he grew up hunting. Being only about an hour away from where he lived, it was a perfect place for him to go for an evening hunt, or even if you just wanted to go for a morning. Being nice and close to home, it was a perfect place for him to do that. And on this particular day, he actually worked in the morning, but he had the afternoon off. He got home from work at about 1 o'clock, tossed all of his stuff into his truck, and then he made that hour drive towards Lilly. When he got out there, it was about 2:30 in the afternoon. He parked his truck, got out, put on all of his camo, grabbed his bow, and then he started making his way down this little fence line that runs for about a quarter mile before it connects to this chunk of bush. When he reached the end of that fence line, he turned to the east and he started making his way along the bush line. So he had the trees off to his left with a field off to his right. He walked about a half a mile to where this creek bed comes out of the bush to the north and into that field. And once he got to the creek bed, he turned to the north and he followed it for about a half a mile to the other side of this one piece of the property where there's this big bean field. He liked to set up in this particular area, especially in the evenings, because all the deer tend to go to the feed at night. And he always had really good luck on this bean field. So that's where he was heading. So he headed down this creek bed at about 40 yards before he got to the edge of the bush line where the creek bed goes into the beans. He turned to the west and he walked 50 yards into the bush from that point. From there, he has this one particular tree that he always liked to set up his saddle. If you don't know what a saddle is, it's a form of a tree stand. Basically, you wear like a little bit of a harness and it's connected to a rope, and you sit on it, you put this little metal base up against the tree, so that's what your feet will actually go onto, and you just kind of lean back. It's perfect for archery because it gives you lots of mobility. You can kind of move around the tree so you can really get yourself into a position for a shot at a deer or whatever it is you're hunting. They're very light and very versatile, so it's a lot easier to use a saddle than carry in a big hanging stand or a ladder stand or something with you. When he got to his favorite tree, he climbed up, rigged up his saddle, pulled up his bow, hung it on the bow hanger that he had already put in the tree the year before, and then he just kind of leaned back and settled in for the evening's hunt. Everything seemed normal. He was seeing lots of deer, just nothing in range or nothing that he could or wanted to shoot. But about 45 minutes before dark, he started to notice a real uptick in the deer activity. A lot more started to move into the beans. And so he was kind of scanning the area because he was looking for this one particular buck. About 20 minutes before dark, he could hear something moving behind him. So he kind of turned and looked and noticed that there was a doe coming down through the bush, angled towards that creek bed. So he watched this doe pass by underneath his saddle, walk right up to the edge of the beans right beside the creek bed, and then she just stopped. As soon as she stopped, she turned and she started looking over to the west and just stared hard into this chunk of brush. So his first instinct was, she stopped and she's looking this way. Maybe there's going to be a buck coming out of this brush. So he turned and he just kind of focused on this pile of brush and he could hear something moving through it. So at this point, he decided he was going to get his bow ready just in case. So he reached up, grabbed his bow, got it ready. He just kind of kept peeking around this tree, hoping and expecting to see a buck come out. Right as it seemed like that potential buck was about to come out of the brush, that doe turned and she just full tilt ran to the east. A couple of seconds later, Ben was hit with this absolutely disgusting smell that he described as being the smell of wet dog and copper. A couple of seconds later, right in front of him as he's staring towards this pile of brush, this large creature stepped out 30 yards in front of him. As soon as he saw it, he knew what he was looking at. He's from Michigan, so he grew up hearing stories about the Michigan DOGMAN. And even though he heard those stories, he just could not believe what he was looking at. He describes this DOGMAN as being about 9 feet tall, being covered in dark grayish black fur. He said that its back legs bent backwards just like a dog. He said it had a long tail. He said it also looked like it had a mane around its neck, lots of hair around its neck. He said and its ears were pointed, standing straight up. He said its arms were almost elongated. He said the front arms were very long with big claws on the ends of them. So Ben's up in the tree staring down at this DOGMAN, and this DOGMAN starts walking to the east directly to where that doe had been standing. When it got to where it had been standing, this DOGMAN squatted down, legs kind of to the back with one of its arms on the ground. Ben described it as almost looking like a sprinter's stance. And this DOGMAN, while it squatted down, puts its nose to the ground, smelt the ground where that doe had been standing, and then it just started staring off to the east. At this point, Ben decided he was going to try and take a picture of this thing. So he very slowly and cautiously went to hang his bow back on that bow hanger. And as soon as he got the bow up to it, it made a very inaudible little click. And as soon as that clicked, this DOGMAN turned and just stared directly up at Ben while he's hanging in the saddle in this tree. As this DOGMAN's staring at him, Ben said it just let out this guttural growl. He said he could feel it just resonate through his body. And a half a second later, this dogman just went running off to the east in the same direction that that doe would run. Ben's up in the tree at this point now, completely in shock at what he just saw, and he's absolutely terrified. He knows that it's going to be dark in about 20 minutes, and he has to walk almost a mile all the way back to his truck. But he did not want to get out of the stand at this point, not after seeing that dogman. So he decided he was just going to stay up there for a little bit, and hopefully that dogman would be long gone by the time he came down. Ben waited up in the tree for almost 2 hours before he felt comfortable enough to climb down and make his way back to the truck. When he got out of the tree, he very slowly and very cautiously, trying not to make any noise whatsoever, made his way towards that creek bed. Once he got to the creek bed, he turned to the south and he started making his way back to that other field. When he was about halfway down the creek bed, he noticed something up in front of him. He saw these two yellow lights, and it only took him a couple of seconds to realize what he was looking at. And he recognized these yellow lights as being eyes, and those eyes were almost 9 feet off the ground, and instantly he knew he was looking at the eyes of the dogman that he had just seen a couple hours before, or another one. He stopped, stared towards these eyes, and then he turned around and started running back towards that bean field. As he was running back towards the bean field, he only made it about 50 yards, and he could hear this dogman running through the bush beside him, run up past him, and then come back onto the creek bed, and now he was staring at those eyes directly in front of him again. He said it felt like this thing was toying with him. So he turned around again, and he went running back towards the truck to the south. The whole time as he was running down this creek bed, he could hear this dogman running behind him through the trees, whipping across the creek bed to the other side, and it just kept zigzagging back and forth behind him. When he was about 100 yards away from the end of that creek bed where it enters that south field, that dogman again let out another deep guttural growl. And again, Ben could just feel it reverberate through his entire body, and that gave him just a little bit of a push to run a little bit quicker. And once he broke the bush line where that creek bed entered that field, instead of turning to the west and running along the bush line that he walked in on, he just ran at a diagonal across the field back towards his truck. As he was running across the field, that dogman let out an absolutely demonic sounding howl. Ben just continued running across the field till he got to his truck. Once he got to his truck, he opened it up, jumped inside, and then he started backing out of where he parked so he could get onto the road so he could take off. As soon as he started to back up and his headlights illuminated on the bush in front of him, right in front of his truck, no more than about 10 yards away, this dogman was just peering out of the bush looking directly at him. He said in that moment, he felt like this dogman was saying to him that I could have had you at absolutely any time and there's nothing you could do about it. He said, aside from the growl and the howl that he thinks that not even Hollywood could recreate, the most disturbing part was the way that this thing looked at him. He said this thing was just looking through the bush right at him. It pulled its lips back and exposed its teeth to him, almost like it was smiling at him. He said that was the most disturbing part, because at that moment he knew that this thing could have had him at absolutely any point and there would have been nothing he could do about it. Ben's advice is, don't go in the woods alone. He said if you're going hunting, he said aside from the fact that these things are out there, he said anything can happen and it's just always better to have somebody with you in case something happens. So his advice was just never go into the woods alone. Well, that's it for today's encounter. As always, if you have any comments on this, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And as always, too, thanks for joining us. And if you haven't done so already, if you're out in the woods and you happen to see Dogman, quietly reach for that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Wisconsin.